Welcome back to the classroom. In the last lesson, you worked on your story as an artist. We're going to build on that story theme in this lesson by talking about your buyer's story as a way to connect with them and influence them to buy your work. Because just like you have a history that influences the creation of your work, your buyers have a story too that influences their purchase of your work. And understanding that story helps put you in situations to sell it. Your business, and specifically your marketing and sales activities, become the orchestration of two-story collisions, yours and theirs. So here's what it looks like graphically. Your buyers have a story arc, and you have a story arc. And in this framework, marketing just becomes the orchestration of the collision of your two stories, based on things like shared experiences, shared values, or a shared mission. The goal after that connection is for your stories to continue, but in the future, it's two intertwined stories where they're an owner of your work, a fan of your work, and a customer to manage. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how to bring this methodology to life. This lesson has three goals. First, I'm going to describe what you need to understand about your buyers to consistently sell to them. Then I'm going to show you a framework to describe your buyer's story to capture that understanding. And then finally, I'll show you how to apply it in the Creative Build workspace. So let's talk about profiling your buyers. If you were to Google customer profile, you would see hundreds of different formats of how to describe a customer. And most of those formats are pretty static. They include things like demographics, gender, race, age, occupation, annual income. And those can be useful, but a better way to describe customers is through their behaviors and their attitudes. Demographics don't adequately predict behavior, like buying behavior. And they don't tell you why someone buys, because the people within a demographic group are actually pretty diverse. So a lot of business leaders use something called a persona to describe their ideal customer. And that's a combination of demographic information, but also attitudes and behaviors. It's a little stronger. But even a customer persona is pretty static. It captures your customers at a moment in time. And the reality is that your buyers are on a journey where their thoughts and their feelings and their behaviors are dynamic. They're changing based on where they are in that journey. So my favorite way to describe your ideal customers isn't with a demographic profile or a persona, it's as a story. And so that's the framework we're going to use for our customer profile. But first, let's talk about why you need to understand your buyers at this depth in the first place. It's because you can't sell to someone that you don't understand. Understanding your buyer's story gives you a level of understanding that enables you to sell work to them. It gives you three different levels of buyer understanding. It tells you who they are, it tells you why they buy, and it also tells you how they buy, which includes where they buy. So you know where to show up to market and sell your work. The other thing that a buyer's story framework does is it captures that information in a way that builds empathy with your buyers. And empathy is necessary to connect with them on things like shared experiences, shared values, and shared mission, the foundation of brand marketing, and the things that connect your story to your buyer's story. So let's dig into the buyer's story. Buyers generally follow a 5-act story. And the way that I've named these acts might look familiar to you if you've ever studied marketing and sales funnels. We're going to cover that in lesson 3. But understanding your buyer's story according to these 5 acts sets a foundation for planning marketing and sales. And it makes your marketing and sales empathetic. The first act is awareness. Your buyers become aware of a need and they decide if they're going to take action. I'll show you an example of this in a minute, but not all buyers who become aware of a need decide to take action. Maybe the need isn't important enough for them to do anything about it. If a buyer's decided to do something about the need, they move to consideration. And during consideration, they're considering all the different ways they could solve for that need. In this phase, the competitive set that they're considering goes beyond art, because art isn't the only way to solve a lot of the problems that it does. I'll show you what that looks like when we look at the example in a moment. But during the consideration phase, if they decide to buy art, they move to the decision phase. And in the decision phase, they're shopping within the category of art, the category that you sell, and they're choosing who they're going to buy from. That could be you, or that could be another artist. So the decision to buy your work doesn't happen until the end of the decision phase. We have 3/5 of the journey that happened before they make a decision to buy your work. That means you have significant opportunity to influence them before that point of purchase, where we usually think about a sale happening. Awareness, consideration, and decision are opportunities for really rich marketing and sales activities that look different from just trying to sell a thing. If they buy your work at the end of the decision act, they move to the retention phase. And in the retention phase, they're trying to decide if they should buy more work from you based on their experience with buying your first piece, and also based on the experience that you've given them after that moment. And of course, your goal is to sell more than one piece of work for each customer. If they buy more than one piece from you, they move from the retention phase into the advocacy phase, where they're trying to decide if they should recommend you to another buyer who's in their close circle, to their friends and their family. Your goal here is to get them to make that recommendation as often as possible, to build a fan base of buyers who market and sell your work on your behalf without you having to do anything. Now, here's the thing. Each buyer story is unique, but each buyer story also has themes that are probably related to your shared experiences, your shared values, and your shared mission. And highlighting and understanding those themes is what makes this a powerful tool to build a sales and marketing plan in the future. Tool 2 and this lesson are all about understanding your buyer. We're going to cover the build of a marketing and sales approach in tool 3. But first, let's look at an example of the type of information you want to capture by looking at an example of a 5-act story for a person I'll call Janelle. I'm going to read the story to you, and I want you to listen for themes that pop out of Janelle's story that maybe you share with her, or that maybe you could imagine other buyers sharing with Janelle. A little background on Janelle. Janelle's job is overwhelming, and it's affecting her relationship with her daughter, but she just hasn't had time to do anything about it so far. This is what the first act, awareness, looks like for Janelle. One evening, while playing with her daughter, Janelle realized that she needed to do something about feeling so overwhelmed. She wanted to have more energy for playtime, so she decided to do something about the overwhelm. So the next day, she took a sick day. She confided in her work friend who was worried about her. Her friend mentioned she'd recently become hooked on fantasy novels. Later that afternoon, while waiting for her daughter to come home from school, she scrolled book reviews and discovered a fantasy author who also happens to be a single mom. So Janelle bought her latest novel right there. And what happened? Janelle became immersed in the fantasy world that author created. Nightly reading gave her calm moments that led to restful sleep. So she had to buy the author's earlier work too, to continue that habit. The next week, Janelle's friend Robin texted her to vent about her job. Janelle felt proud to tell Robin about the author she had discovered. She was happy to help her friend with the same situation she'd faced. So what universal themes did you hear in that story? Overwhelm at work, struggle of being a single mom, the importance of connection with children, the need for escape, and how fantasy stories can deliver escape, the tendency to go to friends to ask for help, and how that often leads to paying it forward and helping your friends as well. All those are parts of Janelle's story, but they're probably also parts of your story too. And they're parts of my story. A lot of those themes are universal. And those universal themes are what you're going to use in your sales and marketing plan when we get to building that in the 3rd lesson and in tool number 3. So how do you learn this rich understanding and story about your buyers? The way to do that is with interviews. And so tool 2 isn't just about theoretically understanding your customers. Tool 2 gives you the resources to go out and actually learn this in the real world with real potential buyers through customer interviews. And I'll show you what that looks like when we get to our demo. Before we get there, let's look at what an experiment might look like to test your knowledge of buyers built through the use of tool 2. Maybe you have a hypothesis that your buyers are influenced by friends, the way that Janelle was. And an experiment you might run would be to offer discounts to your customers for referrals. Your success signal might be a positive return on the financial discounts that you give to your customers. So that's your experimental setup. Let's look at what the results might look like. Maybe your sales grew, but that discount ate into your profits and your profits went down, which would tell you that discounting isn't profitable. And so maybe your next move is to test other incentives for referrals. Although this experiment failed, you learned something important about the financial return on discounts as your method of referral. So now that we've gone through the theory of the buyer's story, let's look at how to apply it in the Create a Build workspace. Here we are at Tool 2, Know Your Buyers. You get here by clicking on the Tool 2 tile in the title strip. The page should look familiar to you by now. We have some information here to help you get into the mindset to use Tool 2 and little reminders about hopefully what you've learned in this lesson. And then we have instructions on how to use it. Tool 2 starts with an interview guide that breaks down an interview into the 5 story acts that I described in the lesson. And it provides some sample questions that you can use when you interview your buyers. So step 1 is actually to download and print this guide. This guide is your notebook. When you interview a buyer, you want to take notes or make sketches in this tool to capture the information you learn along the way, using the suggested questions in the interview guide. Now, a word of caution about interviews: each act has 5 sample questions. Use those as starters. Your goal isn't to get through all the questions. The goal is to get the interviewee talking about themselves and to share information about their story in words that they choose. So once you get your interviewee talking, your job is just to listen and take notes, not get to the next question. Once you've done interviews, what do you do with that information? And that's the next section in Tool 2. You enter your notes here. We have a section for your interviewee first name, the date of the interview, a description of them that might include the demographic information we talked about earlier, and then you have your notes. Note-taking helps you solidify the understanding of the buyers that you talk to. Typing them here and entering them into the tool solidifies that understanding further by recalling multiple interviews at one time. The simple act of typing them up here will help you see those themes that we talked about earlier. And you can add multiple interviews in this location. Now, what happens to those interview notes once you've entered them? Well, they're saved here. You can come back and you can look at past interview notes here. You can view them. You can make edits to them. So this becomes a repository of all your business's customer knowledge. Next, we have a summary. Your interviews give you raw data. What you're looking for is themes across each act of your buyer's story and across all the different people that you spoke to in your interviews. Here's where you capture those themes in one place. As you build on your customer knowledge with more interviews and by just running your business and selling to people, your understanding of your buyer's story will evolve. This section is to capture at a moment in time your current understanding of your buyers across all 5 acts. So whatever you put here in this section doesn't change unless you change it. This is also a great place to come back to recall what you've learned and to build upon it when you learn something new. And then the final section looks like the last section on every tool page. This is where we have action cards. Once you've done your interviews, you've done your analysis, you've found the themes, you've written them down, how are you going to put that into action? So you can create action cards that go into your plan from this location. And then finally, just like every other tool page, once you've done work in Tool 2, you can come down here at the bottom and you can share what you've learned with your advisors. So hopefully now you get the type of understanding that you need to build for your buyers, their story, and you've learned how to go get that information about your buyers. In the next lesson, we're going to put that knowledge into action by building approaches to reach your buyers and connect with them through your marketing and sales activities.